Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to the first of the past summer series for 2025. I'm Scott Lord. I'll be kind of moderating our PowerPoint today, and today we're going to discuss the past guidelines, the revision 7 editions that this team's been working on for over the last 2 years. So I want to thank you all for being here today and taking the time to kind of see what the team's been doing, the changes that we've seen in school security over the last 10 years, and some of the reasons for why we are making the changes to the guideline. I'll say the first thing is that the guideline is going to be posted here very soon. We're hoping by Friday, you're going to be able to download the new Rev 7 edition. So that is in the final processes of being able to be uploaded to the website. So stay tuned for that, and we'll make sure that we're sending out alert to everybody when that is complete. Our agenda today is we're going to talk just a little bit of who is PASS and why PASS, and then really dive into some of the changes we've seen in the guidelines that needed to be done just from what we're seeing in the changes in school security and how that's evolving and threats are evolving. And we recognize that there were some changes that needed to happen to the guidelines to help better educate our school districts and our school officials on a safe and secure school. So for those of you who may not know PASS, PASS was started 11 years ago, some of it by the very team members that we're seeing here today that I am graced to have as our panelists. And our mission at PASS really was to be able to provide an information and guidance to help securing and enhancing school safety and security, looking at leading practices, nationwide practices, and really put it into a format that a district and school professionals could really use. A lot of us have been in the industry for a long time, and the security industry has a lot of acronyms and a lot of things that we all understand from being in the industry. But when we first started, there was really nothing there for schools to have some sort of guideline of how to put in security. How do we make technology decisions? More importantly, what is the job description of a safety and security officer? We didn't have that over a decade ago. And we know that we need to have that, and we do have those things in place now. And PASS was really created to be able to do that. One of our founders, Chuck Wilson, and he's the chairman of our board, likes to say, he says, I wish PASS didn't exist. You know, our entire goal is how do we make it to a point where PASS doesn't need to be around? And, you know, while I think that's a great goal, we just see what's going on in our schools today and in our country today, and we realize that this is needed. And this is very valuable for the districts and for the schools when they're looking at how are we building safety and security practices. And a large part of this is recognizing that this is all a volunteer effort. So PASS was actually created and was first funded by SIA and NSCA as a 501c3 organization to really bring a group of volunteers together to put these guidelines together. And it's absolutely amazing what this group has done over the last decade. I really do like to brag upon them because what has happened, you know, considering that as long as PASS has been around and the success that we've had and the fact that we're on the 7th revision of the guidelines, we still don't have a full-time employee. And it's because everybody who works on this is dedicated, doing the right thing for the right reasons for our schools, and they want to support the effort. So some of the things that we look at is who makes up that team. And we actually use this slide for schools as far as how they look at doing their safety and security. But from the PASS team, when you look at the individuals that are involved, and specifically in Rev 7, we had over 45 individuals that come from all walks of the school safety community or the school community as a whole. We have law enforcement and fire marshals. We have parents. We've had students that have helped us in looking at some of the changes that we needed to do. We have administrators that are on our board and safety and security school directors, as well as the IT individuals. That's one of the neat things that we're going to see in the new guideline, and would encourage you to check out the August 6th Summer Series webinar where we talk about digital infrastructure and what that means within a school. So we also have the vendors and manufacturers that are there that have been working in this industry for a long time. And some of them are manufacturers or integrators that have gotten into school safety and security and started because of the threats that are going to schools today. So a lot of the group that you see with PASS is a culmination of these people that all volunteer to help provide their expertise to be able to help support schools and districts on how do they actually have a holistic and interoperable approach to school safety and security. I do want to kind of thank our volunteers once again. And for those of you who may not know PASS, here's just some of the highlights that we found from last year alone of looking at what the impact is that PASS has. We've got all 50 states that have downloaded the guidelines, as well as 39 countries, over 37,000 users from all different channels downloading the guidelines. It's one of the things I was just talking with Chuck this morning, and the state of California is starting to write a lot of their funding and a lot of their safety and security goals, and they're going to be using the PASS model in order to be able to do that. So the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools and these volunteers that take their time and dedicate to do this is the results that we're getting, and it just shows the need that's there. So I want to jump right into kind of what is the guidelines and how are the guidelines made up. And the way the guidelines work is that we have a layered approach to security starting at the district-wide level and working our way down to the classroom interior. And I do want to point out, for those of you who have used the PASS guidelines over the years, our layers have changed. We now have a digital perimeter layer that is between our campus layer and our district layer. We used to have a parking lot layer and campus layer. Now we combine those two and are actually going to be expanding that in the next revision. But we recognize that one of the things we needed is to give more guidance and more information on what the leading practices are from a digital infrastructure and cybersecurity perspective. That is a wave that is definitely happening with schools on ransomware attacks and trying to get that personally identifiable information that schools have and house. So we wanted to make sure that we had that layer there to be able to do that. So again, I encourage you to sign up for our August 6th webinar, where the committee who put that together is going to be speaking and kind of going through a lot of how that was put together, how to use the new checklist that we have now with the digital perimeter. Within our layers, we have components, and you can see those 7 components there on the slide. And it really starts with policy and procedures and people and roles. One of the key things to school safety and security that we've discovered as a group is we have to make sure that we have the right people in the right positions, that we know what those positions are, and what are the policy and procedures that we're going to put in place as a district, as a school, for safety and security. Because without those, how we build the school, the technology, how we put access control, video surveillance, the detection systems we put in the schools, really kind of revolves around those first 2 things. What are we doing to make sure that that physical technology that's going to be put into the schools is working towards the impact of the policy, procedures, and the overall goals that you're looking to do as a district to keep the building safe and keep our students and staff safe and secure. And really, when we first started this, 10 years ago, the question was just, what do we do? I think one of the things we looked at was 88% of the schools didn't have access control or video surveillance back in 2014. What were the guidelines for that? As a code geek, I know fire. I can tell you exactly what needs to be put in a new building, what you've got to do for an existing building, because those codes have been here for almost 100 years. But where were those for schools? And more importantly, with that not being there, we were tasking administrators, we were tasking school resource officers, we were tasking operations managers who are now becoming emergency specialists with no training or no understanding on how that works. So that's really why we brought the PASS team together, while we created this organization and why we've created these guidelines. And what we've discovered when we did that is this is always changing. I think one of the favorite sayings that we had in our technical committee this year was, if you've seen one school, you've seen one school. They're all built differently. They have a community unto themselves. They really are kind of mini villages throughout the district. So how do we make sure that we're providing that information, giving some guidance that's going to work in such a unique environment? And what we've discovered as we've gone through the last 10 years is that our districts have really, really pushed forward on how they're doing their school security. And with that, we had to make sure we were updating and providing information for the newer technologies, the newer processes, and really the ways that the K through 12 market was going to, how they're approaching school safety and security, and how do we put that into a holistic way that is easy to understand. So it is truly my pleasure to introduce our presenters today. We're going to start with Guy Grace. I'm going to let each of you kind of do your bio, but Guy is a longtime advocate, 40 years. I think we're celebrating this year, Guy,
40 years.
in school. What's that?
40 years.
Yeah, 40 years in school safety and security. Started in Littleton, Colorado, and was really one of our first founders with PASS when we first came out with the guidelines of helping guide us. And Jim Crumbly, this is probably his brainchild. I remember that day when we were trying to figure out what we were going to call this organization and were we going to be an organization. So Jim Crumbly from Risk Response Solutions, who's a consultant and integrator, and has been in this market for over 30 years. And then we'll hear from Stacy Dentz, who's 25 plus now, isn't it, Stacy? Dedicated to emergency communications, specifically in schools. So if there's anybody that I've relied on over the years looking at communications and that sort of thing, it's been Stacy in the educational market. And then finally, Mark Garcia with HID. He manages the K through 12. He's the director of the K through 12 education vertical for HID, and he's going to talk to us about access control updates. And if there's anybody who's more passionate about working for safety and security, I haven't heard someone other than Mike. So
Scott, when you started the name PASS and Jim was part of it, I remember you asked him, "Hey, Jim, come up with a name." He goes, "I'll pass."
So it really is a treat to be able to have this group here to talk with you today on what we've got in our changes for Rev 7. And with that, Guy, I'm going to kind of hand it over to you. And do you want to talk a little bit about just the holistic approach that we're doing, some of the things you've seen over the last decade, and some of the updates we've done with the district-wide layer and policy and procedures?
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today. First of all, I want to thank all of our attendees. Obviously, many of our attendees or everybody that's attending has an interest or is a practitioner in school safety. You are responsible for the life safety and the empowerment of the learning environments across our entire country. You are ensuring the safety of and the future of our great country. And of course, we have our international attendees and PASS guideline users. What it's all about is protecting our young ones and the future of our world. So when we think about school safety, being in this for many years and seeing an evolution of the use of technology, human roles and policies and procedures. Everything we talk about in PASS and recommend in our guidelines is not about replacing people. It's about providing tools that enhance the ability of the teachers to teach and the students to learn. So when we are in the PASS guidelines, nothing that we say is about replacing people. It's about giving people those tools to best protect their students and their staff and their community members that use the school. So the reason we do that is because our aim in PASS is always to promote a holistic interoperability approach. We often hear, and sadly we hear about the active shooter incidents that happen at schools. But those of you like myself, those of you that work in school safety and emergency preparedness, we all know that school safety is an all hazards approach, just like any other vertical. Everything and anything, because when you look at a school's communities, you often have 20% or even up to 70%, depending on the size of your community, in your schools on any school day. In addition, schools are not just open for school hours. They're open almost, 18 to 20 hours a day with the after schools, after activities, all the things that go on in school. Schools are community centers. And often too, the value of your home, the how people look at your neighborhood is centered around those schools. So when we look at schools, we need to think about the all hazards approach, and we need to think about the holistic approach of creating interoperability within our district to promote the safety and security and the ability for those students to learn in a proactive and safe environment. And we all know too, many of you know this, if you turn the school into a prison, you may be secure, but what you're going to do is going to impact that ability, because you want to not try to create security processes, procedures, and technology, and not do the proper district roles and procedures and the policies in place. You can go too far and turn your school into a prison. You don't want that to be that way. So you have to be very holistic about this. So in the earlier slide, it all starts with creating a team in your school district. Before you do anything else, is creating a team of internal and stakeholders, as Scott pointed out, all of those internal stakeholders, and it could be much more, depending on the size of your district, the external stakeholders. And why do you do that? Because you're looking at all the risks, and what you're trying to do is create a holistic interoperability approach with your internal stakeholders and your external stakeholders. So that holistic interoperability approach, it takes a team, and that's the first thing you do. So when we look across the United States right now, we see many school districts looking at creating a security operations center, hiring a security director, hiring folks to man security operations centers. However, I would challenge people, that some people say, well, I'll never have a security operations center because my district's too small. And we see that. But think about this. Every one of our schools, pretty much the good majority of them, have office staff that are doing buzz-in of visitors that are coming to the buildings. They're looking at the cameras, the principals, administrators, and at the very least, they're in there controlling access. They're controlling who's coming and going into their buildings. So you think about that. Every school, you could have a district-wide command center, but every school is going to have a little command center, like they're going to have a computer, and they're going to be the secretaries or the security personnel. They're going to be using that technology to control the access and to be seeing what behavior is going on in their schools. So when we do this, and we look at what we're doing in the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, we lay it out, that possibilities to scale from a security operations center, but down all the way to a office, and using the security technology to leverage and empower our folks to provide a safe and secure learning environment by using the technology components. We do not say specific brands or technologies. We are agnostic at PASS. So we recognize there's many ways, often through our components, that we recommend that you can do this. And there's many ways that can be affordable or it can be expensive. And that's why we call it tiers, which will be covered later on. But we look across the United States, it's very important, like Scott indicated. We think back to 2013. At that time, about 60% of schools in the United States had a camera system. And it was on what we called the old analog. Most of them were on the old analog systems. But now we're at 98% of our schools in America have a video management system. We're into the 90% that our schools have some form of electronic access control system. And we think about this, when we look at these things, we also have legislative laws that are driving much of the technology that we must put in schools. We think of Alicia's law in the DRESS systems. We think about digital mapping. We see about in Florida and Texas, for example, and Ohio and Tennessee, we have laws on how to, what type of doors and hardware we must have in place, how those inspections must be done. We have legislation across the country that specifies, that we must have emergency operation plans. So when we think about that, that could be, an educator you got a lot on your plate, right? And when you went in through your master's program or your bachelor's program to be an educator, I'm certainly this in most 99% of the cases, there wasn't any type of, how do I say, a course on security in your caseload. And then when you come to your schools, it's on the job and you have to learn these things and be cognitive of them. You can't ignore them. So that's what we do. That's what Partner Alliance for Safer Schools. We have sister groups such as ASES and PASS, and we look at like what PASS, we hear that description. We call ourselves the plumber's manual of school safety. That one, when you go to Home Depot and you buy a shelf and there's a complex instruction in there, we're in there, we make it in there, and we make it easy to read and to understand. And what you see when you look at that, why is that simple manual so important? Is because also when we look at school safety now, much of the technology we've put into place into the schools, it cannot work. Most of the components that are recommended cannot work on their own. For example, if you have weapons detection, for example, and you get an alert and you don't have the ability for your students and staff to shelter behind a door or understand where the exits are to get away from that situation, what did you just do? You just alerted folks to, you didn't utilize those components through a layered security approach to protect and serve those staff and students at your schools. So when you think about that, unification of systems is so important. And that's what we stress here. How does a address system unify with an access control system? How does a address system unify with a mass communication system? How does a mass communication system unify with a fire system? What are the cybersecurity needs of that school district to ensure that all of those devices and technologies function together? But most importantly, and this is the thing, how do we ensure that these components are going to be utilized and empower those staff and students at the schools? So I'll let my colleagues go to their next sections. And if you folks have any questions, please ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. And I do appreciate you bringing up the questions. So we do have a question and answer portal. So please put your questions in there and we'll review those and take a look at those either at the end or while we're going through this. So Jim, I'd like you to introduce yourself and kind of give us a quick bio of who you are and take us through some of the changes we made to Rev 7 with the video surveillance component.
All right, Scott, I appreciate it. Jim Crumley, I'm in Atlanta, integrator here with Risk Response Team. And I've been involved with PASS since the beginning. So going back over 10 years ago, we met here in Atlanta, a large group of us coming in from around the country and dedicated to giving end users, administrators, security professionals, public safety professionals, the tools necessary to design, implement, and maintain a comprehensive security program for your school. Much of the focus in the media especially revolves around active threat, active shooters, but day to day, schools face all kinds of threats. And if you're mitigating these threats, in a lot of ways, you're taking the steps necessary to mitigate and respond appropriately to some of the active threats and active shooter situations that we see in our country. So I want to emphasize that this is a foundation that you can build upon. Now, on the video side of the platform, historically, video in schools have been used primarily used on a day-to-day basis for discipline and then also for post-incident investigations. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually a good thing because a disciplined school is a safer school. When kids feel more safer to interact with each other, there's not as much bullying going on. Kids are behaving. There's maybe vape detectors in the bathrooms, so kids feel safe to be able to go into these locations. that generates trust inside that school that can help kids share when there actually is something serious going on with another student, or if they see something that they feel like they should report it. So discipline, we can't discount the benefit that cameras make towards discipline. Post-incident investigation, again, extremely important. It's not just, well, we're just going to see what happened. You can backtrack with your systems, find out where someone went, if there's a suspicious person or a perp on your property, you can use your video system to go back and find it. And then during an incident, the ability to pull up these cameras and have that unified platform is extremely important. So now you're tracking where the threat is, what's going on, maybe being able to get a jump on who needs assistance during the incident. Things like that are really important for the schools to be able to do. And I also want to emphasize the ability to share that video with law enforcement. So the technology has changed, and the cooperation between school districts and local law enforcement, sheriff's department or police department, county or city, and a lot of schools have their own police department, but the ability to share that information with a 911 call center, with a command trailer, incident command trailer, and having the ability to do that seamlessly by either providing a laptop or giving them VPN access or using a web service. There's a lot of ways of doing it now that weren't really common or widely available even just a few years ago. So we definitely want to add to that aspect of it. So as we've looked at these, we have enhanced the video platforms and integrated a couple of other things that we feel like is really important. All right, so I'm going to go over what we think is really important and everyone should emphasize here. One, we have outlined for you the operational requirements for your security video platform. All right, so when you are designing it, if you're going to add cameras, because almost all schools have cameras now, if you're going to add cameras, you need to look at the operational requirement. We're looking at detection, observation, recognition, and identification. Those are the four requirements for a camera system. If all you need is to be able to detect somebody, that somebody is in an area, you don't need as many pixels per foot on that subject as you might be if you need to recognize that person. Is it a familiar face? Is it somebody we know? Observation. What color shirt are they wearing? What is their race? Are they male? Are they female? Are there any other characteristics that you might be able to help identify who this person is, what they're up to? So as you design it, you just don't want to have to go and say, I'm going to throw a 5 megapixel camera everywhere, or a 4K camera everywhere. You can pick and choose and go to a lower resolution camera if it fits that need. And we think that's very, very important. Additionally, what we wanted to do is that we've talked about the unification of access control and cameras, and the unification of communication with your surveillance camera system. So what you can do then, if the incident happens, whether it's a football game that you've got somebody at the operations center keeping an eye on thing, basketball, they're watching inside the hallways to make sure people are not wandering around in areas they don't need to, or if it's an actual incident, having that unified platform so you're not opening up cameras to deal with it, then opening up access control to unlock a door. You're doing it in one seamless package. A lot of VMSs have some of that capability. There's also third-party software that can really pull these in. But what we're emphasizing is an open platform so that now you can use the ability when that platform is open to share that information, share those details. We're building a unified platform for a school district that is open, and that platform is actually used for something else that we've been able to take and integrate maps and cameras and access control. Things are getting more and more open as time evolves. So we really think that's very important for us. And that's something that we put in as now a tier 2. Last Rev 6, it wasn't even in there. Now we feel it's so common that this is something you should emphasize as a tier 2, as long as you've got your tier 1 things taken care of. Another thing that we've emphasized in here is the people identification at pickup and drop-off areas. So we want to be able to identify a good high-resolution camera with appropriate light conditions and the ability to filter out too much sunlight. It needs to be a good camera because you need to identify what child got into what car, any features of that car, and hopefully even a tag as that car is leaving. So now you've got documentation of where that child went and what vehicle the child got into if you have to do an investigation. Another thing that we've added recently into the guidelines for Rev 7 includes classroom cameras. Now, classroom cameras have been very controversial, and there's even some union rules that perhaps might prevent or make it difficult, but we are really encouraging everyone to look at classroom cameras. Just a couple of years ago, the thought of cameras all over a school was unheard of. And we think that we're leaving because so many schools are hesitant to put cameras in the classroom, that we're leaving some of the things vulnerable. Because with the cameras now, you can do masking so that if I'm an operations person, if I don't need to be able to identify and see everyone inside that classroom, we have technology available that can mask those individuals. Then if Mr. Garcia has a higher need, a higher level of authorization, then he can see these cameras without the masking. And these are things that can really do to help the teachers feel like their privacy is protected, even though there's no right of privacy inside a classroom. But still, they want to feel like that they've got a little bit of say-so and that what they feel is protected. So this is a way around that. But when you think about discipline, and as you try and convince your administrators and your teachers and maybe a union that this is a good idea, I've seen accusations made against teachers cleared up because a camera was in the area and they were able to investigate it and determine that what the kid was alleging did not happen. Conversely, I've seen accusations against students that were cleared up because of the camera. So these are things that are really important. And when you talk about discipline, you talk about the need for all of these people to kind of come together and investigate an incident, then having cameras clears it up. You're reducing the number of interviews you have to do. You have an easier time of determining whether or not someone is lying or they're telling the truth, who threw the first punch. All of these things are important. Now that ties back into video analytics because you can also set these cameras up inside the classroom and elsewhere to utilize the video analytics. Analytics, long on promise, short on performance, historically. But now it's gotten better. We feel like that we can trust the analytics and the cost has come down enough. And so many schools have built a good, robust video surveillance system. We feel like it's okay to put into as a tier 4 recommendation for video analytics. So schools can do cross-line detection, loitering. They can do directional alerts. All of these things can be very important. You can design using analytics if you've got some type of weapons detection platform or metal detectors at entrances, and then you can look at other entrances to make sure kids aren't sneaking in there and have pop-ups happen and alerts happen so that somebody is keeping an eye on these areas. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is audio recording. We feel like that audio recording can really be helpful in classrooms, maybe in areas where people are interacting with each other, staff, clerks are interacting with parents and with visitors. And there are legal requirements. You need to check with your state and your attorney, et cetera. But I think that this is something we're really pushing for and moving towards. And I think we're going to see this overall.
Well, Jim, I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to go through that because I think there have been a lot of changes. That's one of the first things that really came about were video surveillance in the schools, and we're seeing a great dynamic through that. We do have a question on classroom cameras that I'm going to save to the end because I want input from everybody on that one. So I know that's a topic we've been talking about quite a bit. So, Stacy, I'd like to hand it off to you. Want to thank you for joining us here and kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the changes we've done in the communication component. I know from at least my history in doing school intercoms, they were required, then they weren't. Now we're all talking about reunification and efficiency in communication. So there's a lot of changes out there. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
I would love to. Hi, I'm Stacy Dins. Nice, glad to be with everyone today. And I am the product director at CareHawk. And as Scott mentioned, I have spent the last 25 years living, breathing, sleeping school communication systems for K through 12 schools. So I am super happy to be here to represent PASS and talk about the communication component. I believe communication is probably the most basic or maybe fundamental thing that you can have for safety. If we don't know what's happening, we can't respond. So from communication, from saying, hey, I have a problem, to sharing to the entire building, district-wide, to first responders that there's an emergency going on, it's just critical to everything moving and working together. So there's three key things, as you see here. We're going to talk about the district-wide approach to communications. I'm going to address panic alarms and Alyssa's law, and then talk about adding a visual component to public address. So we'll start with district-wide. Guy spoke about this as well. You know, in traditionally, school public address and intercom systems have been purchased school by districts with not necessarily, certainly in the past, a lot of thought of what you had in one and what you had in the other and if they would connect to each other. But as we look at emerging technologies and school safety needs, we can see that connecting these disparate systems in a district-wide approach is so key. The ability for a school to pick up a telephone, make a page to every school in the district to let them know maybe ongoing what's happening with an emergency, or in terms of like a community-wide threat, I think of like a weather emergency, like a tornado, the ability to push a button and have the school communication system tell every school in your community, you have a tornado warning, you need to move to the proper locations, you know, away from windows to an interior corridor, and everybody getting that information at once. And what that does, by being able to do it with a single action to the entire district, that speeds up the time that you're getting this information. And you'll hear as I speak on communication component, reducing the time of everybody knowing when an emergency is gives people more time to respond and get themselves to safe locations. So that is the key. And the other part of the unified approach is connecting that public address system to other systems. So when a panic system, alarm system is pressed, the communication system is sharing audible, and we'll get to visual notification. And as you'll see, you know, video surveillance is doing the changes that it needs in its system, and the access control is changing how it needs to work to allow the emergency response to occur. So let's move on to panic buttons. I think most people on the call are familiar with Alyssa's law. Alyssa's law, just to give everybody a little background, it basically just calls for a silent panic alarm to reach out to the 911 call center and let them know that an emergency is happening in this school. It is a state-by-state law, so it's not a federal across the board. So there's about, I believe, 11 states today that have some form of Alyssa's law passed. And there's a whole slew of other ones that have active, what's the word I'm looking for? Active laws being considered in their legislation. So I'd encourage you to, you know, for whatever state you're in, find out what your state Alyssa's law, the language between them differs a little. So make sure you understand what your state's calling for so you can comply appropriately. From the past guidelines, what we're calling for, so when we look at the interior and classroom layer, we're calling for in tier 1, a hardwired panic button in the classroom. So that allows anybody, any occupant in that classroom, not only teachers, but students, if they needed to press a button and say, I need help in my classroom. And that's going to reach out to 911 at a minimum. In tier 2, we've added the concept of a wearable panic button for staff members who are in charge of students. And that allows the teacher, now they have a device that is on their person at all times, and they can press that button whenever they need to, when they feel that they need assistance in their classroom. And that allows them, maybe they're not in a situation where they can get to that hard button on the wall safely. Maybe they're with a student who's had an injury or an illness and they don't want to leave that student. Now they can press that button right on their person and start that emergency response happening. And the last thing I want to note here is in the district-wide layer, in the people component, we've actually called out for training for wearing these mobile or these wearable panic buttons. And I can't stress how important I think that is. Empowering your staff to know when it's appropriate for them to press that button is critical. If they're wearing a button or they have a hard button in their room, but they don't feel comfortable, like, is this enough of an emergency to press that button, then it's not helpful. So training your staff how to use these are critical. So you're getting the emergency response. Again, we're back to that, reducing the time and communication and getting that communication out as fast as possible to your building occupants. And the last section is adding this visual component. So now we don't just have a public address system, we have an audio visual public address system. So in tier 2 of the building and classroom layer, we're calling for adding a visual notification piece to that public address. This can be as simple as strobes. ADA requirements around strobes are really clear. It helps notifying hearing impaired people in your building. It can also be really as sophisticated as monitors and displays in classrooms and common areas. They can display the actual emergency type. So it'll say lockdown or evacuate. And then it can give even instructions on what the response is. So if I'm a teacher in my classroom, maybe I'm a substitute teacher, I have a display in my room that says lockdown, lock your door, shelter in the hard corner, tells me what to do. And anyone's in an emergency, sometimes it's hard to remember what those things are you're supposed to do. So instructions and visual notification helps everybody do the right thing. So I just want to wrap up and say thank you for everyone. Big fan of communication. So this is us communicating to you and learning about everything. And Scott, I'll pass it back to you to move along.
All right. Well, thanks, Stacy. Really appreciate that, because I do think communications is one we're starting to see that's kind of that next step of how do we get more efficient and how we communicate and make our systems more interoperable. All right. And last but not least, Mr. Michael Garcia, can you take us home and try to leave us a few minutes to answer some questions? So tell us a little bit about yourself, Mike, and what we did in some of Rev 7 with the access control and architectural component.
Sure. And I mean, look at the slide. It's a really, really good, detailed slide. I mean, I'm not going to read from the slide, let you guys do that. But what I do want to say, as you do look at this slide, is PASS partners are all of you. We are all PASS partners. It's the Partnership Alliance for Safer Schools. That first word, partners, is everyone on this call. There's 105 people on this call, maybe more. It's the last time I looked. That's a lot of people listening to what we have to say from the perspective of school safety and security guidelines, the North Star that you point to for where you're going and the things that you're doing in your district. Why is that important? Because as PASS partners, all of us on this call are contributing to PASS on a daily basis, whether we know it or not. Everyone who uses the guidelines is a partner. Everyone who tells somebody about the PASS guidelines is a PASS partner. And this partnership is our strength. It's our superpower, right? I'm here today. I've been here all week. It's been a long week, and Guy Grace and I have been presenting pretty much every day at the Campus Safety Conference in Austin, Texas, my backyard. And so as we move this along, everything that we've presented on has been something related to the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools guidelines. The past guidelines, these new revs, we've been talking about this all week. And right before I came into and logged into this call, I get asked by, I'm doing a tour here at the HID campus, and that's who I work for. I work for HID Global, and I've been doing this for doing school safety and security in particular for about 20 years, right at 20 years. And I was asked by a representative of a state education agency, hey, where do I start? We're doing these things with the state at the state level. Where are we going with it? Where do I start? And the perfect place to lead them was the past guidelines, right? It is the right thing, the perfect thing for us to go to as partners of PASS and pass it on. We pass these things on, right? And that's what we've been doing at this conference. Amazing time. We've done some really, really great things. And what you're seeing now on this slide is access control, nothing new. I've been doing access control for about 30 years, maybe a little more. And we've been doing it for some of the largest and most secure enclaves in the United States, FBI, CIA, IRS, every Marine base in the US, every Army arsenal, the White House. We've performed these unified safety solutions and provided these solutions for these very, very important organizations and agencies, but there's nothing more important than a school district. So I was looking at some statistics earlier as Guy Grace threw some of those out there, and it was from the National Center for Education Statistics, right? So it's got to be true. And it's saying 97% of public K-12 schools have adopted access control measures. Huge win for us. A lot of them have been forced to by their state agencies, and there's no federal mandates yet or federal requirements yet. So that's why these past guidelines are so important, because they're coming. They are coming. They'll be here. And the model for this, the ASIS, the as-is model, was built around the foundation of the past guidelines, right? So if you're using the past guidelines specifically for access control, which is a foundational security product and is your baseline for everything that clips into there, think Lego, then you're already ahead of the game, right? Utilizing the past guidelines, not only for access control, but for every aspect and every tier, and every one of these past guidelines, access control being the primary one that we're involved in right now, because 76% have classrooms with doors that lock from the inside, right? That's what this is saying. 71% require staff to wear badges or photo IDs, and 92% use security cameras for monitoring, right? So all of this plays in together, and it plays in together with what we do, because Rev 7 is preparing us for the future, right? You heard the word unified. We've been using the word unified for 20 years, right? It's nothing new. However, with schools utilizing only about 20%, I took a little poll here at Campus Safety, not only with the attendees, but also with some of the vendors here, the access control companies. I said, doing school safety in the K-12 districts, what percentage of the full capabilities of your access control system do you believe that K-12 school districts are using? So I had everything from 10% to 20%, but those are still low numbers. Okay, what does that mean? It means that as we progress and as we begin to get a district-wide approach, I don't care if that district is 4 schools or 40 schools or 400 schools, as we get a district-wide command, contain, control, and communications perspective on all of this, everybody that's here today and all of these, everybody that you're listening to today, all of this comes into play. Why? Because as we look at the most important thing in the school right now, the audits are happening in Texas as we speak. Right across the street is where everybody convenes, makes decisions on funding and on how schools are going to be audited. And they're looking at doors, right? And they say, Garcia, what do we do? How do we comply with it? And I say, LYFD. lock your freaking doors. You LYFD and you'll pass those audits. But you've got to understand that that's just a Band-Aid, right? We have to bring this to a more grand scale, and that's where PASS can help. Because as we put these tiers in place, tier one, of course, if we look at the first revision of the PASS guidelines and the first time we put this together, we were still locking the classroom doors from the outside. Horrible, right? We've learned a lot since then. We've had many casualties since then, and so we put these together as the group we called PASS. And what we're finding out is we're preparing you for the future by positioning these doors and working out, right? So our assets are behind that classroom door, and just like a bank protects its assets with a safe, that door is our safe, right? That door has codes associated with it. It has door hardware associated with it. So everything that you're going to get in the PASS guidelines is associated with those. Classroom doors locked and closed at all times. Your secure visitor center entry. A lot of time and information was put into these guidelines, and a lot of thought. We research schools all across the nation. We all visit different schools. I probably visit, several hundred a year, and we bring all that information to you so that you can have it here in front of you. I would say that there is something called the fear of doors. It's entamophobia. So entamophobia is an actual fear of doors. And sometimes when I go to schools and I talk to educators, we'll talk about don't be afraid of the door, right? They're talking about their doors propped open. They're talking about how people are dogging doors open because practical drift and complacency and apathy set in. And those are people, and security is people. So the people, the process, and the technology together is what we're working on. But when you go through these new revisions, when you go through the changes in the tiers and specifically in access control, please pay attention and remember to inject the human error into this, right? What you have with what we've put together is the ability to, like a seatbelt in your car, if you don't put your seatbelt on, your car is going to tell you that something's wrong. It will ding, ding, ding until you do the right thing. When you go into an airport and you get on an airplane, you get the safety speech. You get it every day. You get it every time you get on an airplane, whether you fly 100 times a year or two. They never stop. It's always getting the people to understand that safety is first and foremost. And that's where we're going with this. That's what we want access control to be as a foundational security product. We want you to understand that just because you have the technology in place doesn't mean you can forget about the people, the training, the processes that go around it. I can put a $1,000 door, a $10,000 door in a school. But if the processes and procedures are not involved and the training is not involved in that, I can knock on the door and somebody will open it, making it worth zero. So just remember all of those things, please. I'll end there, and I want to thank everybody for your contributions to PASS. We love you guys. We totally understand those needs that you have at the school district level and how hard it is to take some of these things and push them up into the school board levels and the administration levels. And we're here to help as much as possible to help you with that.
Mike, thank you so much. Appreciate it, and really appreciate all your dedication and everything to it, and really that real world practicality that we have of, it doesn't matter what the technology is. If we don't have the processes behind it and the training behind it to make it useful, the technology doesn't do us any good. And so just to kind of wrap up a little bit, this is a little bit of a tease of some of the digital infrastructure that we're going to see on the August 6th webinar. So again, I encourage you to sign up for that. I know I am, because even after spending a year with these folks and understanding the importance of this, I only understood about 20% of it. So I'm really happy that they came together to help put that in plain language for somebody like me. But it's obvious that this is one of those threat items that we knew existed, but is starting to become more and more important in our schools. So I do encourage you to check that out on August 6th on the new digital infrastructure. At the end of the day, really the PASS entire mission and focus is helping our schools kind of answer these two questions. What is it do we do next, and how do we prioritize that? And I just want to, say personally, over the last decade of seeing how our schools have really taken this effort so seriously on how they're putting their school safety and security direction together and being more strategic about it. It's really great to see just how everything has evolved to date, and we hope that the past guidelines have really helped you with that. So some of our resources, I think, some of our white papers were mentioned, but I definitely encourage you to go to the website and look at the white papers that are there. The one on classroom barricade devices, there's one there on secure visitor entries that made it into Rev 7. A lot of these white papers that you see come out are the starting point of what we're hearing from you and how we can improve and what we can do, and some leading practices that are there that may not be in the guideline. And so a lot of the white papers that you see there are a lot of the things that happened in Rev 7 came from some of those white papers that are there. And as I said, the checklist should be, and the guidelines should be available hopefully at the end of this week, that you'll be able to download for the new Rev 7 guidelines. So we do have a little bit of time. So Mr. Maxwell, I want to thank you for your questions. Guys, we've got about 4 minutes. So we're going to start with this, and I'm going to hand it to you there, Jim, and then ask others to comment on it. William asked, where do you see success across the country of teachers allowing cameras in their classrooms?
That is a great question. And, I'm predominantly around the South. So I can't speak to anything nationally, but I do know that they're putting cameras in classrooms. Some of the systems that they're using for cameras include a microphone. So it helps with teaching instruction. And then those are tied into a security recorder. But as far as anything else nationally, I'll throw it out to the group and see if they have any information to share.
Jim, you hit it right on the teeth. We think after COVID, we put in many school districts, probably up into 80, 90%, close to it, have put for e-learning cameras for the instructional enhancement of their classrooms, for the case of virtual learning, interactive learning that goes on in a classroom. Now, the case study I would say that we see, and I have to be very brand agnostic here, so I can't mention the brands or the service providers. However, there is a cameras almost in every camera. There's a camera in almost every classroom in America right now, when you think about it. So what we're thinking, and what people are doing this in many cases, is taking that learning camera and only in an emergency leveraging it for the emergency response capability, using that camera, because there is a expectation of many school boards and teachers across our country for privacy and other issues. However, the cameras are there for learning, and that's the thought of, we can leverage those cameras for emergency response. So I have to be brand agnostic. There are many case studies on that out there right now, as success stories of that being there. So that's another one. The other one would be, when we look at solutions like what Stacy talked about, we look at cameras and intercom boxes with video and audio streams that only activate in emergencies, for example, that can be leveraged by law enforcement or security operations stance. Those are things that are emerging right now. And then the good old fashioned in a BMS, putting a camera, part of where your school board and your staff wants that can take place as well. But I want to point out to everybody and every teacher in America, you got learning cameras in your classrooms now. Okay. They can be leveraged for emergencies, but the appropriate thing to maintain those expectations of privacy is have good policies and procedures and utilize them properly for the ways for emergency response.
Well, thank you, Jim and Guy. I appreciate that. We've got just 1 minute, but we do have one more question about communication. And part of this is, what is the reason for visual communications not being a tier 1 requirement? I think that's an absolutely outstanding question when we when we look at that. And my quick answer on that from the communications aspect is, there was quite a change where we were really working hard to keep the classrooms quiet. And in doing so, there is a lot of schools that don't even have audible communication in the classrooms anymore, other than maybe a phone on the wall with a small speaker. So we had to make sure we started someplace. Stacy, do you want to kind of comment a little bit on the visual aspect of it too?
I would agree with you, Scott. I mean, getting the audio announcements into the classroom has to be our first priority. But I mean, tier 2 visual notification is right behind that. So I think it's just a priority of audio and then the visual component.
All right. Well, we are right at the top, 1 o'clock. So I want to thank everybody who joined us today, and especially thank you, Guy, Stacy, Jim, Mike, for taking the time and all the work and effort that you guys have put forth to help make Rev 7 a success and help get that word out. So thank you so much for there, and thank you to all who are watching today and everything that you do to keep our students and our staff safe in our schools. So with that, we will close up, and you all have a great day and stay safe.